Does the Bible permit the Christian to eat every kind of meat, or the Bible prohibit the Christian from eating certain kinds of meat? Journey with me as I examine some biblical passages to determine God's will on this question. The Bible tells us in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. What we learn from this passage is that the heavens and the earth, everything that is in the universe, was created by God. And then as you continue reading, you get to a point that is in verse 26 and 27, where we are told that God created human beings in his image and likeness and gave them the charge to govern whatever God had created. In verse 29, we are told that God gave fruits and herbs to humans as their food. So, right from the beginning of creation, God did not give meat to human beings as their food. He rather gave them herbs and fruits. So the question is, at what point did human beings begin to eat flesh? We find that answer in Genesis chapter 9 verse 3. After the global flood, we are told that Noah and a few of his descendants who entered the ark and survived came out of the ark and God blessed them. And in verse 3, that is Genesis chapter 9 verse 3, God gave them animals as their food. And God made reference to Genesis chapter 1 verse 29, saying that just as I gave you fruits and herbs, now I'm giving you everything that moves and has life. So it is in Genesis chapter 9 verse 3 that we see that God gave human beings meat to eat as well. In Leviticus chapter 11 verse 1 to 40, God, having delivered Israel from their Egyptian bondage and now leading them to the promised land, gave them some laws concerning what kind of meat they can eat and what kind of meat they cannot eat. Let's read some few passages in Leviticus chapter 11 verse 1 following. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a split hoof, completely divided, and that chews the cud. There are some that only chew the cud, or only have a split hoof, but you must not eat them. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is ceremonially unclean for you. The coney, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is unclean for you. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a split hoof. It is unclean for you. And the pig, though it has a split hoof completely divided, does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you." From this part of Leviticus chapter 11, that is verses 1 to 8, we find the law concerning which kind of mammal one can eat and which kind of mammal one may not eat. There are two conditions. The first is that the mammal must have a split hoof that is completely divided, such as those of goats, sheep, and cow. Then the second condition is that it must eat its cud. That is, when it finishes eating, after some time, it must bring out what it has eaten and chew again and eat it. That is what we mean by an animal that eats its cud. And so now you are thinking of some animals, and I know you have seen that the goat has the two conditions or satisfies the two conditions and so can be eaten. Sheep is an example, the cow is an example, and other animals. But you heard of the pig. The pig, though has divided hoofs, does not eat the cud, and so it does not qualify to be eaten. So these were the conditions that were given as far as four-legged animals, or let me say mammals, are concerned. Let us now continue reading from verse 9 and know what was said about organisms living in water. Read with me from verse 9 following. "Of all the creatures living in water of the seas and the streams, You may eat any that has fins and scales, but all creatures in the seas or streams that do not have fins and scales, whether among all the swimming things or among all the other living creatures in water, you are to detest. And since you are to detest them, you must not eat their meat, and you must detest their carcasses. Anything living in water that does not have fins and scales is to be detestable to you. From what we have read, there are two conditions also for organisms living in water. And the two conditions are that the organism, mostly fish, must have fins and scales. The organism or the fish must satisfy these two conditions before it may qualify to be eaten. So redfish has qualified. Tilapia has both fins and scales, just as redfish, and so it also qualifies. But salmon, though very sweet, does not qualify, because even though it has fins, it does not have scales. So salmon and some kind of sea organisms do not qualify. So take note of that. Let us now continue reading and consider what the Lord will say about birds. From verse 13 following. These are the birds that you are to detest and not eat because they are detestable: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kit, any kind of black kit, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, the green owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork, any kind of heron, the hoopoe, and the bat. From the text we just read, we know which birds are not expected to be eaten. Unlike the mammals and the fishes, where we were told this condition and that condition must be satisfied, in the case of the birds, only those which are not to be eaten have been mentioned, without any conditions attached to it for us to use them as criteria to know which ones we can select to eat or not. So we may assume that apart from these ones that have been mentioned, the rest can be eaten. Let us now move on to consider what God said about which insects can be eaten and which ones cannot be eaten. All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be detestable to you. There are, however, some winged creatures that walk on all fours that you may eat. Those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of these, you may eat any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper, but all other winged creatures that have 4 legs you are to detest. This is from verse 20 to verse 23. This part of the text talks about the kind of insects that can be eaten or that cannot be eaten. We have the grasshopper, we have the locust as examples of those which can be eaten. And so apart from those mentioned, it is assumed that the others cannot be eaten. Now, the issue is so serious that we are told that it is not only that you cannot eat them, but you cannot even touch their carcasses. And touching their carcasses will make one unclean before the Lord. And so that is the seriousness of the issue. When you read Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 3 to 20, you will find a repetition of this same law over there. Now, apart from these passages, there could be other passages, but they are minor on the issue at stake. And so we see that the Old Testament perspective is that not all kinds of meat may be eaten, because some are clean, others are unclean. I'm sure by now you are getting ready to go and throw some stew that you prepared with salmon or soup that you prepared with pork away. Why? Because you have seen clearly that from this passage we are not supposed to eat such meat. But please don't throw your meat away, don't throw your soup or your stew away. Wait, we need to do something more before we can conclude on the issue. What do we have to do? I've said in one of my videos that the Bible was revealed progressively. And so God's revelation through the Bible, having been given to us progressively, needs to be looked at holistically before one can make valid conclusions. What I mean by that is that we have looked at the Old Testament perspective, but we have the New Testament as well. So we need to move on to the New Testament, where we will ask Jesus about his view on this issue, and we will use the Gospels to do that. Then we also ask the early church by looking at the book of the Acts of the Apostles to see whether they met an issue of this nature and how they dealt with it if they met an issue of this nature. Then after that, we will ask Paul, who is also a prominent figure when it comes to Christian theology. We will ask him, go through his letters to find out if he said anything about the issue. Then after that, we may consider other writers of the New Testament to find out about their perspective. So we need to do that in addition to what we have done to have a holistic view about the matter. But for now, this is where this video will end. I'll come to you shortly with the second part, where we will look at the New Testament perspective. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.